Most people think the rarest Rolex is the most expensive one. It is not. The most expensive Rolex at last month's auction will surface again. Someone will sell it, and another record will fall. That is how expensive it works. Rare is different. Rare means the watch was made 12 times in history, and 3 of those 12 are currently missing. Rare means it was bolted to the outside of a submarine and sent somewhere no human eye could follow. Rare means the person holding it right now is not thinking about price. They are thinking about what it would mean to let it go. We are going through 10 of those watches. By the time we reach number 1, price will feel like the wrong conversation entirely. Number 10. The Oyster Quartz Datejust 17013. The first rule of Rolex is that a Rolex does not tick, except when it does. The late 1970s were an ugly period for Swiss watchmaking. Japan had flooded the market with quartz movements that were cheaper, more accurate, and easier to produce than anything mechanical Switzerland had to offer. Entire companies were disappearing, and names that had survived 2 world wars could not survive a battery. Even the strongest names were quietly reconsidering what they were. And Rolex, steady, stubborn, seemingly immune to trends, made a decision that almost nobody saw coming. They went quartz. Rolex built the Oyster Quartz Datejust in 1977. It looks like nothing else Rolex has made before or since. The case is angular, almost architectural. The bracelet integrates flush into the body of the watch, as though the watch case and the metal band were carved from a single block. It is genuinely beautiful in a way that feels foreign to the brand, like meeting someone's confident, well-dressed cousin who you have been told about for years but never actually seen. Inside sits the caliber 5035, COSC certified from 1979, equipped with a thermistor that compensates for temperature changes to maintain accuracy that most quartz movements cannot approach. Rolex did not go quartz reluctantly. They went at full capability, and that is the part nobody gives them credit for. Then they stopped, almost immediately, in watchmaking terms. Production of all Oyster Quartz references spanned from 1977 to 2001, with the total pool across the entire line estimated at fewer than 25,000 units. For context, Rolex today produces approximately 1 million watches annually. The entire Oyster Quartz production run represents roughly 10 days of modern output. Within those 25,000, the reference 17013 is a fraction. Within that fraction, complete sets, watch, original box, punched papers, and all documentation are a fraction of the fraction. Collectors who find them tend not to advertise the fact. Here is what nobody says about the Oyster Quartz. It is the only evidence that Rolex was ever afraid. And Rolex, in the decades since, has been quiet enough about it that most people watching this video have never seen one in person. Which is precisely why the people who collect it never let go. Picture the buyer in 1979 who chose the reference 17013 over the mechanical Datejust. He probably sold it in the 90s for almost nothing, not understanding what he had. Somewhere, the person who bought it from him understood immediately. It has not moved since. The reference 17013 was one moment of doubt. The next watch is the opposite. Rolex was at its most certain and most exclusive. Number 9. Platinum Day Date with ultra-rare Arabic dial. The Rolex Day Date has existed since 1956. It has always been the watch that sits above everything else in the Rolex catalog, available only in precious metals, fitted with the President bracelet, worn by heads of state, and people who needed the room to know they had arrived. But within the Day Date family, there is a configuration so restricted that even serious collectors encounter it only rarely. The Platinum Day Date, with a full Arabic dial, Eastern Arabic numerals for the hours, Arabic script for both the day and date displays, produced exclusively for select authorized dealers across Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Distribution is extremely limited. The watch is only available at select authorized dealers in the Middle East, specifically in Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the territories of the United Arab Emirates. It is not available globally, and it is not on the Rolex International website in the way most models are. You cannot walk into a boutique in London or New York and place an order. You need to be in the right city, at the right dealer, at the right moment. And even then, these watches do not sit in display cases, waiting. The platinum case is 950 platinum, not white gold, which Rolex uses for other models. Platinum, the densest, most difficult precious metal Rolex works with, is reserved exclusively for their top-tier day-date references. The dial is finished with a radial sunburst brushing, with Arabic hour indices in mirror-polished white gold coated deep blue. The day displayed at 12 o'clock is written in Arabic script, and the date window follows. The whole watch is a culturally specific object, made for a specific region, a specific tradition, and a specific understanding of what a presidential watch should mean. Here is what makes it a never-sell piece. Rolex does not disclose production numbers for any of its watches, but insiders and specialist dealers agree that Arabic dial day dates are produced in batches of a few dozen at most. A platinum Rolex day date with an Arabic dial, sold at Christie's for more than $110,000 after an intense bidding war. In many Gulf families, this watch is not purchased. It is received, presented at a milestone, a succession, a marriage, or a negotiation concluded. The son who inherits it does not sell it for the same reason he would not sell his grandfather's land. It is not a financial asset. It is a statement of continuity. The next watch was made for professionals who needed to know what time it was in two cities simultaneously, and whose very first pieces made are almost impossible to find intact. Number 8. The GMT Master 6542. Pan Am pilots in 1955 had a problem. Flying the new transatlantic routes meant crossing time zones fast enough that a single time zone watch became genuinely useless. You needed to know what time it was in New York and what time it was in London simultaneously. And you needed to read it at a glance, in a cockpit, at altitude, with turbulence and fatigue, and a full instrument panel competing for your attention. Rolex built the GMT Master for those pilots. The reference, 6542, the original, arrived with a two-color bezel and a fourth hand pointing to a second time zone on a 2-4 hour scale. It worked. Pan Am adopted it, and the watch became part of the culture of aviation in a way that Rolex still trades on today, 70 years later. The problem for collectors is what happened to the earliest examples. The 1,955 and 1,956 pieces, the very first GMT Masters to exist, came with a bezel insert made from bakelite, a brittle, organic plastic that chips, cracks, yellows, and eventually disintegrates. Most of those original bezels did not survive. Rolex, servicing watches the way they always have, replaced cracked bezels during routine maintenance. They were doing their job. The result, from a collector's standpoint, is that finding a 1,955 or 1,956 GMT Master reference, 6,542 with its original bakelite bezel still intact, is a different proposition entirely from finding the watch itself. The watch without the original bezel is a conversation. The watch with it is a six-figure argument that nobody loses. There is a specific feeling that comes with holding one of the earliest GMT Masters. Not from the watch itself, from the knowledge of where it came from. The men who wore these across the Atlantic for the first time were not collectors. They were professionals doing a job. They wore the watch until it needed a service. Then they handed it to Rolex, which replaced the bezel and sent it back. The fact that any original bezels survived is almost accidental. Almost. Now, let's talk about the watches that were never meant to come back to the surface at all. Number 7. The Triple Calendar Moon Phase. Reference 8171. Padalone. Say the word Padalone to any serious Rolex collector and watch their expression change before you finish the second syllable. It means Big Pan in Italian. The nickname comes from the reference 8171's case, oversized for its era, substantial in a way that felt almost aggressive in the late 1940s, when most fine watches were small and discreet. Rolex produced this watch between 1,949 and 1,952, a window of just 3 years. And inside that window, they made something that had no business existing under the Rolex name. A triple calendar with a moon phase display. Day, date, month, current moon phase, all simultaneously, all on a dial that read clearly without crowding, in a case that wore like something between a dress watch and a sports watch. It was technically ambitious in a way that Rolex rarely attempted before and has not seriously attempted since. This is the version of Rolex that could have gone differently. The the one that decided, briefly, to compete with Patek Philippe at the complication level and then walked quietly away from that decision forever. The survival rate among existing examples is painful. The reference 8171 uses a snap-back case, a case back that presses closed rather than screwing down, and decades of improper openings have left most surviving examples with scratches, dents, and case damage that reduces their value dramatically. Dials have been replaced, and hands have been switched. The watches that made it through with everything correct and original are extraordinarily rare within an already scarce reference. The steel versions, because Rolex also made the 8,171 inches gold, are the ones collectors truly cannot stop arguing about. Steel patalones, in fine, original condition surface, perhaps once every few years globally. When they do, the bidding reflects the understanding that this may be the last chance to own one at any price. There is a version of Rolex that made complicated moon phase calendars and had the confidence to put them in steel sports cases. That version lasted 3 years. The reference, 8,171, is all that is left of it. The next watch was built for professionals navigating something far more extreme, and what they were navigating was the bottom of the ocean. Number 6. The Comex Submariner 16610. In 1970, Rolex began a partnership with a French commercial diving company called Compagnie Maritime d'Expertise, Comex. These were not sport divers. These were saturation divers, men who would descend hundreds of meters for offshore oil operations, spending days or weeks in pressurized environments where the air around them was thick with helium. Helium molecules are so small that they seep through gaskets, infiltrate watch cases, and when the diver decompresses, expand with enough force to blow the crystal clean off the watch like a bottle top. Standard submariners could not handle this, so Rolex built a different one. The Comex Submariner carried a helium escape valve, a small vent that allowed the accumulated helium to bleed out during decompression without destroying the case. They put the Comex logo directly onto the dial alongside Rolex's own crown mark. 2 logos. 2 companies. Each watch was assigned an individual issue number, engraved into the caseback, tied to a specific diver and a specific mission. Rolex continued producing Comex watches until 1997, and not one of them was ever offered for sale commercially. The reference 16610 Comex, the final chapter of this partnership, is estimated at roughly 200 to 250 examples and documented auction results and dealer pricing in 2024 to 2025, placing genuine examples in the $100,000 to $180,000 range, depending on condition and provenance. Not one of these watches was ever offered for sale to the public. They went to divers. They went into the ocean. They came back. If they came back, marked by the work. Many were lost. Many were destroyed beyond recovery. The ones that returned intact, with the original dual logo dial still legible, with the caseback engraving still sharp, and the issue number traceable, those are the ones the collecting world fights over. Somewhere, the diver issued number 4,217 worked North Sea oil platforms for 30 years. He came back up every time, and so did the watch. His son has it now and has no plans to list it publicly. That is the Comex story, as it actually lives, not in auction rooms, but in families, in drawers, attached to a kind of memory that money cannot organize. For the next watch, Rolex made fewer than 200 of them in total, and most of the scientific community never even noticed it existed. Number 5. The Milgauss 6541. The Milgauss reference 6541 is Rolex's greatest commercial failure and one of the most beautiful watches they have ever produced. Those two facts are not unrelated. In the mid-1950s, Rolex introduced a watch for scientists and engineers working in environments saturated with electromagnetic fields like hospitals, nuclear facilities, and research laboratories. Strong magnetic fields interfere with mechanical movements, disrupting the balance wheel, destabilizing the hairspring, and turning an accurate chronometer into something useless. Rolex solved this with a soft iron Faraday cage inside the case that shielded the movement from fields up to 1,000 Gauss. The name Milgauss comes from that mille, Latin for thousand, and Gauss, the unit of magnetic measure. The watch they designed to carry this engineering was extraordinary to look at. The honeycomb textured dial, two crossed layers of aluminum, was not decorative. It was a secondary magnetic shield built directly into the face of the watch itself. Nobody else in watchmaking did this, and Rolex never did it again. A rotating bezel calibrated in a configuration that specialists still argue about, and a seconds hand shaped like a lightning bolt. The whole reference looked like it had been designed by someone who genuinely believed scientists deserved a beautiful tool, not merely a functional one. It is estimated that fewer than 200 examples were produced across the earliest Milgauss references, combined before the model was redesigned in 1960. The reason so few were made is almost comic in retrospect. Nobody bought it. Scientists did not need a watch this beautiful to do their work. Rolex ended up distributing unsold examples as race prizes at NASCAR events just to move the remaining inventory. A watch designed for particle physicists was handed to racing fans. The mismatch explains perfectly why so few survive in their original condition today. In 2023, a single reference 6,541, with a dial aged to deep tropical brown, sold at Philips for 2.2 million Swiss francs. The specialists who know this reference best suggest that pristine examples in exceptional condition can command double what a standard fine example would fetch, and those standard fine examples already sit around 300,000 euros. The honeycomb dial has never come back. The lightning hand has never come back. What made the 6,541 strange and magnificent is gone. What remains of it is in fewer than 200 watches, most of which are not for sale at any price. Let's talk about the missing link that made the modern Daytona possible, and one of the most difficult to find unmodified. Number 4. The Cosmograph Daytona reference, 6,240, the Neanderthal. The nickname is not flattering, it is not meant to be, but it is accurate. The reference, 6,240, is the missing link in the Daytona's evolution, the transitional model that connected the open pusher chronographs of the early 1960s to the screw-down pushers that defined every Daytona that followed. It arrived without announcement, existed briefly, and disappeared before most people noticed it was there. Collectors gave it the name Neanderthal because it is the primitive ancestor of a species that went on to dominate everything. And like the original Neanderthal, it is now extraordinarily rare. What makes the reference 6,240 so specific is the combination of features it carried simultaneously, and that no other Daytona reference ever carried in the same configuration. It was the first Daytona fitted with screw-down chronograph pushers, dramatically improving water resistance. But the earliest examples carried a dial with no Daytona text at all, just the Rolex crown, the timing functions, and a clean face that lets the watch speak without a name attached. Collectors call this the floating logo configuration. On a Daytona, the absence of the word Daytona on the dial is not a defect. It is a date stamp. It means you are looking at one of the earliest, rarest production examples of the reference. The reference, 6,240, produced in stainless steel with an original unmodified dial, correct hands, and functioning original pushers, is one of the most difficult Daytona configurations to locate. Most surviving examples have been modified, pushers replaced, bezels swapped, dials refinished. The Daytona collector world is full of what specialists call Frankenwatches, correct reference numbers housing incorrect components gathered over decades of careless servicing. Finding a reference 6,240 with everything original is the thing the Daytona specialists spend years searching for. At the 2018 Daytona Ultimatum sale at Philips, the stainless steel reference 6,240 sold for $3 million. $3 million for a watch that most people in that room had never examined in person before the sale preview. That number is not the ceiling. That number was a statement of what the market had finally understood about a reference it had undervalued for decades. The Neanderthal does not have the name recognition of the Daytona that followed it. It does not have a nickname that travels easily in casual conversation the way Paul Newman does. What it has is the distinction of being the moment the Daytona became what the Daytona is. The first screw-down pusher, the transitional dial, and the evolutionary step. Hold a correct reference, 6,240, and you are holding the decision that made every subsequent Daytona possible. That is not a minor footnote. That is the whole story compressed into one reference. The watch at number 3 is so rare that there is only one in existence, and even the person who ordered it has never been publicly identified. Number 3, the Cosmograph Daytona reference, 6265, the Unicorn. In 1970, someone placed an unusual order with a Rolex retailer in Germany. We do not know who. What arrived the following year was a Rolex Cosmograph Daytona, a sports chronograph, a tool watch, a wristwatch, whose entire identity had been built around function, endurance, and the timing demands of motor racing. Except this one was built in 18-karat white gold. John Goldberger, a veteran collector who had spent decades handling unusual Daytona examples, felt the difference the moment he picked it up. The watch was heavier than any Daytona should be. The 18-karat hallmark, engraved into the lugs at the back, confirmed what his hands were already telling him. He had found something that should not exist. The Daytona in 1970 came in stainless steel, sometimes in yellow gold. White gold was for dress watches, for day dates and date justs. Nobody made a white gold sports chronograph. The material cost alone made no commercial sense. The only explanation that holds up is that someone with significant influence asked Rolex to make it, and Rolex agreed, and then neither party ever spoke publicly about it. Service marks on the caseback between 1971 and 2010 confirm the watch passed through Rolex's hands on several occasions over 4 decades. Whoever owned it had it serviced and took care of it. And at some point in that long chain, it reached Goldberger, who recognized it for what it was and named it the Unicorn. Not because unicorns are mythological, but because this is the only one that will ever exist. When Phillips offered it in 2018, the watch achieved $5.93 million, with all proceeds going to a children's charity, resulting in one of the largest charitable contributions ever made in the field of watches. The buyer has not been publicly identified. The watch has not been seen since. Somewhere, the Unicorn is sitting in a room that most people will never enter. The person holding it knows they are holding the only one that will ever exist. That is a weight entirely separate from the gold. The watch at number 2 was not made once. It was made 12 times. And 12 might as well be 1. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 2, the Antimagnetique reference, 4113. There is a Rolex that appears in no catalog, is featured in no advertisement, and is sold through no authorized retailer, ever. A watch whose existence Rolex has never officially explained, and whose full story has been reconstructed almost entirely from the memories of the families who received them. In 1942, Rolex produced exactly 12 examples of the reference 4113, the only split-seconds chronograph the brand has ever made, with case numbers running consecutively from 51,313 to 51,324. The split-second complication, called rattrapante in French, allows you to run 2 chronograph hands simultaneously from a single starting point, then split them at different moments to capture 2 separate elapsed times. It is one of the most mechanically demanding complications in watchmaking. Making 12 of them during the Second World War, and then giving them away without a word, is one of the stranger decisions in Rolex's history. The watches appear to have been gifts to prominent racing drivers associated with the Giro di Sicilia, a lengthy race across Sicily, at a time when Rolex was sponsoring Italian motorsport. The histories of individual examples were reconstructed through auction provenance. Watches consigned by the widows of racing drivers, by the children of team managers, by families who had held them for decades without fully understanding what they had. The watch was never featured in any posters, Rolex catalogs, or made available on the public market. It existed in a private world of motorsport and mechanics and silk-scarved drivers until the collecting community gradually pieced together what it was. In late 2025, a reference 4,113 sold in Dubai for $4.7 million, making it one of the 10 most expensive Rolex watches ever sold at auction. In human terms, a watch given as a gift in wartime Italy sold, 80 years later, for the price of a significant building in a European city. Of the 12 made, 3 remain unaccounted for. 9 are known to exist. Those 9 are almost certainly permanent residents of the collections they currently sit in. The next time a reference 4,113 surfaces publicly may not come within your lifetime. And if it does, the hammer price will start somewhere that the previous record cannot see. The watch at number 1 was a scientific instrument built for the bottom of the ocean, and it is the reason every dive watch you have ever seen exists. Number 1. The Deep Sea Special Prototype. In September 1953, Rolex engineers strapped a watch to the exterior hull of a submarine and sent it into the Mediterranean Sea. Not inside a pressure housing, not protected behind glass, they bolted directly to the hull, exposed to the full pressure of the ocean, descending to over 3,000 meters. The watch survived. The submarine was Auguste Piccard's bathyscaphe Trieste. The watch was a prototype with a radically domed plexiglass crystal, engineered not simply to seal against water, but to redirect compressive force around itself, distributing the pressure of kilometers of ocean across the entire architecture of the case. Nobody had built a watch this way before. The dome is not decorative. It is a structural solution to a problem no watchmaker had previously attempted to solve. 7 prototypes are believed to have been built between 1,953 and 1,960. Only 3 have ever been definitively identified. The first went down in the Mediterranean in 1953. The third went further. In January 1960, it descended to 10,908 meters into the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point on the surface of the Earth. At that depth, the pressure is approximately 1,000 times what you feel standing in open air. The crew was inside a reinforced pressure sphere. The watch was outside, fully exposed. It survived. Deep Sea Special Number 3 is currently on display at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It is not for sale. It will never be for sale. It is an instrument of scientific history in the same category as the Wright Flyer or the Apollo lunar samples, a physical object that proved something nobody had proven before. The other prototypes and the commemorative pieces Rolex produced afterward, fewer than 4 dozen in total, distributed exclusively to museums, research institutions, and a handful of trusted partners, are, for all practical purposes, impossible to acquire through normal means. Examples have appeared at public auction only 5 times in recorded history, and the last time one came up was over a decade before a 2021 Phillips offering. When that 2021 example surfaced, the estimate was between $1.3 million and $2.6 million. Everything Rolex built afterward for serious diving, every submariner, every sea dweller, the deep sea that James Cameron wore during his own solo descent to the Mariana Trench in 2012, traces its engineering DNA directly to these prototypes. The Deep Sea Special is not a collector's item in the conventional sense. It is a compressed version of one of the most significant engineering decisions in the brand's history. The dented crystal on Deep Sea Special Number 1 is not a flaw. It is physical evidence of what 3,000 meters of Mediterranean seawater pressing against plexiglass looks like after you bring it back. No factory can produce that mark. No restorer can replicate it. The dent is the provenance. The person holding a Deep Sea Special prototype right now is not a watch collector in any ordinary sense of that phrase. They are a custodian, holding the object that made an entire category of professional watchmaking possible. You do not sell that. You hold it carefully, and you pass it forward to someone who understands what they are receiving. 10 watches. Most of the world will never see one of them in person. Every watch on this list was made for a reason that had nothing to do with the market. For saturation divers at 300 meters, for scientists inside magnetic fields, for racing drivers in wartime Sicily, for a submarine on its way to the floor of the world. Rolex made these watches because something needed to exist. and then, in most cases, stopped making them. The rarest Rolex is not the most expensive one at last month's auction. It is the one that has not surfaced yet. The reference 4113, whose family does not know what they have. The Comex Submariner in a drawer in Marseille. The Deep Sea Special, nobody has seen since 2000. Some watches tell time. These 10 tell you something about what it costs to make something remarkable for almost nobody, with no expectation of recognition, and then walk away from it. If this video gave you something to think about, hit like and subscribe. We go deep into the stories behind the watches that most channels never talk about. And if you have a rare piece of your own and you are trying to understand what you are actually holding, drop it in the comments. We read everything.